The great doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Security Chief Vextar watched from his control room high above the main floor. His four eyes tracked every movement as the newest species prepared to enter their first official meeting. The humans had been approved for membership just 3 cycles ago, and today they would take their place among the 47 other races that made up the council. Vextar's antennae twitched with worry. In his 300 years as head of Council Security, he had never seen anything like this. Every species that joined the council followed the same ancient protocols. They brought their diplomats, their translators, and most importantly, their armed guards. It was a matter of respect and tradition that went back thousands of years. The Zephyrian looked down at his security screens. The insectoid warriors from his own people carried plasma rifles that could cut through steel. The crystal beings called Vortani had energy shields that could stop a missile. The reptilian Keth brought guards with molecular disruptors that could turn an enemy to dust in seconds. Even the peaceful plant-like Florians had their root warriors armed with thorn launchers. But the humans? Vextar's mandibles clicked in confusion. The humans were different. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked into the chamber first. She was a small woman by human standards, with gray hair pulled back and wearing a simple dark blue uniform. Behind her came 3 other humans in similar clothes. They looked normal enough, even if their skin came in different shades and their hair varied from black to blonde. Then came their guards. 5 human males walked in formation behind the diplomatic team. They wore identical black uniforms with no decorations except for small silver badges on their chests. They carried no visible weapons. No rifles, no energy shields, no molecular anything. Each guard had what looked like a simple communication device attached to their ear and a plain wooden stick about arm's length hanging from their belt. Vextar leaned forward in his chair. His security scanners were running full sweeps on the human delegation. The results made no sense. The scanners found no energy weapons, no projectile firearms, no explosive devices, not even basic defensive gear. The wooden sticks appeared to be exactly that, plain wood with no hidden technology. This cannot be correct, Vextar muttered to himself. He ran the scan again. Same results. On the main floor, the other delegations were noticing the same thing. Conversations stopped as species after species stared at the human guards. Some began whispering among themselves. A few looked insulted. High Commander Karath of the Keth delegation leaned over to his aide. "Are they mocking us?" he asked in his deep, gravelly voice. "Do they think we are so weak that they need no weapons to defend against us?" The Vortani delegation's crystals chimed softly, which Vextar knew meant they were confused. The sound echoed through the chamber as more crystal beings picked up the harmonic. Even the usually calm Florians began rustling their leaves in what could only be described as nervous energy. Ambassador Chen seemed unaware of the stir her team was causing. She walked calmly to the human section of the great circular chamber and took her seat. Her guards moved with her, but not in the obvious protective formation that other species used. Instead, they spread out in what looked like random positions around the human area. Vextar watched this with growing alarm. Random positioning was dangerous. Any security expert knew that guards needed clear sight lines and overlapping fields of fire. But the human guards seemed to ignore every basic rule of protection duty. One guard stood near the main entrance, but with his back partially turned to it. Another positioned himself near a group of Zephyrian warriors, close enough that they could strike him before he could react. A third guard sat down in a chair that put him below the eye level of most other species, making him an easy target. "Fools," Vextar clicked. "They will get their diplomat killed." But as he watched more carefully, Vextar began to notice strange details. The guard near the entrance might have his back turned, but his head moved in tiny increments, and in the eye reflection of the polished wall behind him, he could see everything. The guard near the Zephyrian stood in a relaxed pose, but Vextar realized the position put him within arm's reach of 3 different emergency alarm buttons. The sitting guard appeared vulnerable, but from his low angle, he had a clear view. under tables and behind pillars where someone might hide. Still, none of this explained the lack of weapons. Council President Thymar called the session to order. The ancient ethereal floated above the center of the chamber, his energy form pulsing with official authority. We welcome our newest members, the species known as humans, to this gathering of the Galactic Council. Polite sounds of approval came from most delegations. The Keith remained silent. Ambassador Chen, President Thymar continued, please address the council with your people's formal introduction. Sarah Chen stood up. As she did, Vextar noticed something that made his skin crawl. All 5 human guards turned their heads toward her at exactly the same moment. Not the obvious head turn of soldiers following orders, but a subtle, almost unconscious movement, like predators focusing on their pack leader. Honored Council, Ambassador Chen began, humanity is grateful for this opportunity to join the galactic community. We come in peace, seeking friendship and cooperation with all species. Her words were standard diplomatic language, translated perfectly by the Council's universal systems. But Vextar was not listening to her words. He was watching her guards. They stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind their backs, eyes forward. But their eyes never stopped moving. Tiny, almost invisible movements that tracked every delegate, every movement in the chamber, every shadow that shifted. One guard's gaze swept across the upper galleries where Vextar sat, and for a moment their eyes met through the transparent aluminum of the control room. The human guard's expression did not change. He did not nod or acknowledge Vextar in any way. But something in those calm, measuring eyes made the Zephyrian security chief feel like he had just been catalogued, assessed, and filed away for future reference. We understand, Ambassador Chen continued, that trust must be earned. We hope our actions will speak louder than our words. As she spoke, more delegations began to notice the human guards. Conversations started in several different languages and communication methods. The Keth delegation's crystals were chiming more urgently now. Even some of the aquatic species in their mobile water tanks seemed agitated. High Commander Korath stood up, interrupting the human ambassador. A question, if the council permits. President Thymar's energy form flickered with annoyance, but protocol allowed for interruptions during introductions. Speak, Commander Korath. The massive Keth pointed one clawed finger at the human guards. Why do your protectors carry no weapons? Do you mock our traditions? Do you consider us so beneath you that you need no defense? The chamber fell silent. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic crisis that could end a species' membership before it truly began. Vextar leaned forward, wondering how the humans would respond. Ambassador Chen smiled. It was a small, calm expression that somehow made Vextar even more nervous. Commander Korath, we carry no weapons because we believe the greatest weapon is the mind that needs no weapon. She gestured to her guards without looking at them. These men have trained their entire adult lives for one purpose: to protect diplomatic missions. They have studied every species in this chamber, learned your strengths and weaknesses, your fighting styles, and preferred tactics. They have memorized the layout of this building, identified every possible threat and every possible escape route. One of her guards stepped forward slightly. He was tall and lean, with dark skin and completely calm eyes. If I may demonstrate, Commander Korath? The Keth warrior growled, but President Thymar gave permission. The human guard looked around. Our chamber. In this room there are 47 species represented. 12 of those species are primarily visual hunters. 21 rely mainly on hearing. 8 use chemical detection. 3 use electromagnetic sensing. The remaining 3 use methods we classify as exotic. He paused. There are currently 238 individuals in this chamber. 112 are armed with energy weapons. 64 carry projectile weapons. 47 have blade weapons. 15 have what we consider exotic weapons. Vextar checked his own security readings. The numbers were exactly correct. The most dangerous individual in this room, the human, continued calmly, is the Vortani crystal singer in Section 7, Row 3. Her harmonic weapon could shatter the chamber's supports and kill everyone here in approximately 4 seconds. The mentioned Vortani's crystals went completely silent, in shock. The most protected individual is High Commander Korath himself. His personal shield generator could withstand a direct hit from a ship's cannon. Korath's eyes narrowed. And the most vulnerable individual, the human guard said, his eyes finding Vextar in the control room above, is Security Chief Vextar, because his position of authority makes him a priority target, but his location provides only one escape route. The chamber was dead silent. Ambassador Chen nodded to her guard, who stepped back into position. "We carry no weapons, Commander Korath, because we are the weapon, and we find that the best weapon is one the—" 3 weeks had passed since humanity's first appearance at the Galactic Council. The initial shock of their weaponless guards had faded into the background noise of daily politics. Most species had decided the humans were either very brave or very stupid. A few thought they might be both. Security Chief Vextar had not forgotten. He found himself watching the human delegation more closely than any other group. Their guards continued to puzzle him. They stood in their same seemingly random positions, hands clasped behind their backs, wooden sticks hanging from their belts. But the more he observed them, the more he noticed patterns that should not exist. During the morning session on trade routes, one human guard had shifted position exactly 17 seconds before a Florian delegate stood up to speak. During the afternoon discussion on mining rights, another guard had turned his head toward the entrance 4 seconds before a late delegate arrived. It was as if they could predict movements before they happened. Today's session promised to be more challenging. The topic was territorial disputes in the outer spiral, where human expansion had come close to established Keth colonies. High Commander. Korath had requested special permission to bring additional guards, claiming the matter was too important for standard security measures. Vexitar watched the Keth delegation enter the chamber. Korath came first, his massive reptilian frame covered in ceremonial battle armor that gleamed under the chamber's lights. Behind him walked 12 Keth warriors, instead of the usual 6. Each warrior carried a molecular disruptor rifle and wore full combat gear. Their scaled faces showed barely controlled aggression. The message was clear. The Keith were preparing for more than just diplomatic discussion. Ambassador Chen entered with her usual calm confidence. Her 4 diplomatic staff looked slightly more tense than normal, but they maintained their professional composure. Behind them came the same 5 guards as always. Same black uniforms, same simple communication devices, same wooden sticks. No additional security despite the Keith's obvious preparations for confrontation. As the human guards took their positions, Vextar noticed something different in their movements. It was subtle, so small that most beings would miss it entirely. But each guard's steps were slightly shorter today. Their breathing was deeper. Their eyes moved in quicker sweeps across the chamber. They knew something was going to happen. High Commander Korath wasted no time with diplomatic pleasantries. As soon as President Thymar called the session to order, the Keith leader stood and activated a holographic display showing star charts of the disputed region. The Keith hegemony has maintained colonies in these systems for over 2,000 years. Korath announced, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Now humans dare to claim planets that rightfully belong to us. Ambassador Chen remained seated as she responded. Commander Korath, the systems in question contain planets suitable for human colonization that show no signs of current Keth presence. Our surveys found abandoned mining equipment but no active colonies. Abandoned? Korath's roar made several smaller species flinch. Those are sacred sites, ancestral hunting grounds. No human has the right to set foot on soil blessed by Keth. Blood! The tension in the chamber jumped immediately. This was beyond normal diplomatic disagreement. Korath was invoking religious law, which made compromise nearly impossible. We had no knowledge of any sacred significance, Ambassador Chen replied calmly. If you can provide documentation of religious sites, we can certainly discuss relocation of our settlements. Documentation? Korath slammed his clawed hand on his desk, leaving deep gouges in the metal surface. You demand documentation of faith? Of ancestral rites that existed before your species learned to make fire? Other delegations began shifting nervously. The Vortani crystals started humming in harmonics that suggested anxiety. Several aquatic species retreated deeper into their mobile tanks. This was escalating beyond normal council procedures. Vextar leaned forward in his control room. His security protocols were clear. If violence seemed likely, he was authorized to flood the chamber with sleep gas and remove all weapons. But how could he remove weapons from beings who apparently carried none? As Korath continued his angry speech, Vextar noticed the human guards had made tiny adjustments to their positions. Nothing obvious, but each had shifted maybe half a step. The one near the main entrance now stood where he could see both the entrance and the emergency exits. The guard closest to the Keth delegation had moved slightly behind a support pillar that would provide cover from energy weapons. Most interesting was the guard who had been sitting. He was no longer in his chair, but standing near what looked like a decorative plant. Vexitar realized it was not decorative at all, but a Florian observer whose root system extended throughout that section of the chamber. If trouble started, that guard could communicate directly with the Florian neural network. "Your people are thieves and cowards," Korath was saying, his voice getting louder with each word. "You sneak into our territory like parasites, then hide behind council law when challenged." Ambassador Chen's expression never changed, but Vextar saw one of her guards touch his communication device. Just a brief contact, barely a second. But, immediately, all 5 guards shifted their weight forward onto the balls of their feet. They were preparing for action. "Commander Korath," Ambassador Chen said, "personal insults will not resolve this dispute. Perhaps we could arrange for a joint archaeological survey to identify any sites of religious significance." "Archaeological survey?" Korath laughed, a harsh sound that made his warriors bare their teeth in approval. "You think Keth's sacred sites need human approval? You think your soft hands can touch what our ancestors made holy?" He gestured to his warriors. "Show these humans what Keth strength looks like. Show them why they should fear to steal from us." The 12 Keth guards moved as one. They stepped forward into the center aisle, molecular disruptor rifles held across their chests, in what any military expert would recognize as a ready position, not quite aimed but close enough to be threatening. The chamber fell silent except for nervous breathing and the Vortani crystal's anxious chiming. Other species guards reacted immediately. The Zephyrian warriors raised their plasma rifles. The crystal beings activated their energy shields. Even the peaceful Florians extended defensive thorns from their arms, but the human guards did not move at all. Vextar stared at his screens in disbelief. Every other security force in the chamber was preparing for battle, and the humans stood perfectly still, with their hands clasped behind their backs. They looked completely unconcerned, as if 12 heavily armed warriors were not performing, an obvious threat display right in front of them. The Keth warriors began their traditional war dance. It was an ancient ritual meant to intimidate enemies before battle. They moved in synchronized steps, spinning their weapons in complex patterns while chanting in their native language. The meaning was clear to everyone present. This was what happened to those who crossed the Keth hegemony. The display was impressive and terrifying. The warriors were clearly experts, their weapons spinning and flashing in perfect coordination. Several delegates pushed back from their desks, trying to get farther from the potential violence. But the human guards still did not react. Korath noticed this too. His eyes fixed on the nearest human guard, a man with pale skin and light brown hair who stood less than 3 meters from the dancing warriors. The guard was watching the display, but his expression showed no fear, no concern, not even interest. He looked like someone watching a mildly boring performance. "You," Korath shouted over the war chant. "Human! Are you not impressed by Keth might? Do you not fear our warriors?" The human guard turned his head toward Korath. His movement was slow and deliberate, like someone who had just been asked a question during a lecture. "No, sir," the guard replied, calmly. "Should I be?" The simple question hung in the air. The Keth warriors faltered slightly in their dance, confused by the response. Korath's eyes blazed with fury. "Should you be? Should you be?" He gestured wildly at his warriors. "These are the finest fighters in the galaxy. Each one could defeat 10 of your kind. The human guard nodded politely. That may be true, sir, I wouldn't know. You wouldn't know? Korath could barely contain his rage. Look at them. Look at their weapons. Look at their skill. The human guard did look. His eyes moved across each Keth warrior in turn, studying their movements, their weapons, their positioning. His gaze was calm and analytical, like a teacher grading a student's work. I am looking, sir, he said finally. They are very impressive. But his tone suggested he was not impressed at all. He sounded like someone complimenting a child's drawing, polite, but not particularly moved. The war dance ended with the warriors forming a threatening semicircle around the human delegation. Their weapons were not quite pointed at anyone, but the implication was clear. Korath stepped forward until he was just arm's length from Ambassador Chen. Perhaps now you understand the price of stealing from the Keth hegemony. Ambassador Chen looked up at him without flinching. Commander, I understand you are upset about the territorial dispute, but threatening council members violates several dozen galactic laws. I suggest you reconsider your approach. Violates laws? Korath laughed again. Laws written by weaklings to protect weaklings. The 30-minute recess had not cooled anyone's temper. If anything, the time had given High Commander Korath more opportunities to work himself into a rage. He spent the break pacing behind his delegation's section, speaking in harsh whispers to his warriors while gesturing angrily at the human delegation. Security Chief Vexitar used the time to review his chamber's defensive systems. He had sleep gas, energy dampeners, emergency lockdown procedures, and a dozen other ways to end violence quickly. But he found himself staring at the human guards instead of his security controls. During the recess, they had not moved. While other species guards took bathroom breaks, checked their equipment, or spoke quietly with their teams, the 5 humans stood in their exact same positions. They did not eat, drink, or even seem to blink very often. Their hands remained clasped behind their backs. Their eyes continued their slow, constant sweeping of the chamber. One of Vextar's assistants, a young Zephyrian named Caxtel, leaned over to point at a security screen. Chief, look at this. The screen showed biometric readings from all the guards in the chamber. Heart rates, breathing patterns, stress indicators, muscle tension, everything the sensors could detect through clothing and armor. The Keth warriors are showing high stress, Caxtel explained. Heart rates around 100 beats per minute, elevated breathing, muscle tension in combat-ready ranges. Normal for beings preparing for potential battle. He switched to another screen. The Zephyrian guards are showing similar patterns. Same with the Vortani, the Florians, everyone else. Then he switched to the human readings. Vextar stared at the data. This cannot be correct. I ran the scan 3 times, Caxtel said. The humans are showing resting heart rates, normal breathing, minimal muscle tension. They are more relaxed than most beings are when they sleep. But they just faced a direct threat from 12 armed warriors, Vextar muttered. Their stress indicators should be through the ceiling. Unless, Caxtel said quietly, they were not threatened at all. President Tymar called the session back to order. As beings returned to their seats, Vextar noticed that the positioning had changed slightly. Other species had moved their guards closer together, creating obvious defensive formations. The humans had not changed position at all. Commander Korath, President Tymar addressed the Keth leader. Do you wish to continue the territorial discussion in a more diplomatic manner? Korath stood slowly. His armor gleamed as he turned to face the human delegation. I have considered the human response during this recess. Their offer to relocate settlements if we provide documentation of sacred sites. He paused, his scaled face showing contempt. This offer is insulting. It assumes that Keth religious beliefs require human approval. It suggests that our ancestral claims mean nothing without paperwork that satisfies human bureaucracy. Ambassador Chen remained seated. Commander, we simply need some way to identify which areas are sacred to your people. We do not wish to disturb religious sites, but without clear boundaries, accidents are inevitable. Accidents? Korath's voice rose. You call the desecration of holy ground an accident? We call the unintentional settlement of land with unknown religious significance an accident, Ambassador Chen replied calmly. Which is why we need clear documentation. Korath slammed his hand down again, this time hard enough to crack his desk. There will be no documentation, no surveys, no archaeological studies. Humans will leave Keth territory immediately or face the consequences. The chamber fell silent again. This was an ultimatum, which pushed the discussion beyond diplomatic negotiation into the realm of potential military action. Commander, President Thymar's energy form flickered with warning colors. You are approaching violations of Council Charter regarding threats against member species. The Council Charter protects species that respect galactic law, Korath shot back. Thieves and invaders deserve no such protection. He gestured to his warriors, who immediately moved back into threatening positions. But this time, they did not perform a war dance. Instead, they formed a precise military formation aimed directly at the human delegation. Since humans refuse to leave peacefully, Korath continued, perhaps they need a demonstration of why they should fear Keth justice. Other delegations began moving back from their desks. The Vortani shields activated with bright flashes. The Zephyrian warriors raised their weapons to combat positions. Even the peaceful Florians extended their defensive thorns and began releasing chemical warning signals that made the air taste bitter. But the human guard still did not move. Vextar leaned forward, his claws gripping his control panel. He was seconds away from flooding the chamber with sleep gas when something made him pause. One of the human guards, the tall one with dark skin who had spoken during their first session, took a single step forward. Just one step, barely half, a meter, but it completely changed the dynamic in the chamber. Suddenly, he was no longer behind Ambassador Chen, but beside her, no longer hidden by furniture, but in clear view of everyone. No longer in a defensive position, but standing in Maichiu, the open where he could be easily targeted. It should have made him more vulnerable. Instead, it made every warrior in the chamber more nervous. Commander Korath, the guard said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. May I ask you a question? Korath glared at him. You may ask. I may not answer. How many warriors did you bring today? Korath looked puzzled by the simple question. 12. The finest the hegemony has to offer. The human guard nodded. And how many weapons do they carry? 12 molecular disruptor rifles, plus personal blade weapons, Korath answered, clearly confused about where this was leading. Thank you, the guard said politely. Then he looked around the chamber, his gaze moving systematically from delegation to delegation. The Zephyrian delegation has 6 guards with plasma rifles, he said, as if giving a lecture. The Vortani have 8 shield bearers with energy projectors. The Florian section includes 3 root warriors with thorn launchers. The aquatic delegations have underwater fighting specialists with sonic weapons. He continued around the entire chamber, listing every delegation's security complement with perfect accuracy. Species that Vextar knew kept their guard numbers. Secret found themselves exposed as the human calmly recited exact figures. In total, the guard concluded, there are currently 143 armed beings in this chamber, carrying weapons that could level a small city. Korath's confusion was turning to anger. What is your point, human? The guard's eyes met his directly. My point, Commander, is that you seem to believe numbers matter. Numbers do matter, Korath roared. 12 against 5, armed warriors against defenseless weaklings. Defenseless, the human repeated, as if considering the word. That is an interesting assumption. He took another step forward, moving even farther from any cover. Now he stood completely exposed in the center aisle, within easy range of every weapon in the chamber. May I demonstrate something? The guard asked President Thymar. The ancient ethereal's energy form pulsed uncertainly. What kind of demonstration? A counting exercise, the guard replied. Like the one we did during recess. Vextar felt his blood chill. Whatever the humans had been counting during the break, it had not been idle curiosity. President Thymar gave reluctant permission. The human guard turned back to Korath. You have 12 warriors in military formation. Very impressive. But may I point out some problems with your positioning? Without waiting for an answer, he began walking slowly down the center aisle. As he moved, he gestured casually toward different sections of the chamber. Your lead warrior is standing directly under emergency lighting system 7. If those lights were to fail suddenly, he would be blind for approximately 4 seconds. More than enough time for someone to close the distance. The lead Keth warrior looked up nervously at the lights above his head. Your second rank is positioned behind support pillar C4. The human continued, still walking at an easy pace. That pillar is decorative, not structural. It would not stop a determined charge, but it would hide an attacker until the last second. He paused in front of the Keth formation, close enough that the nearest warrior could have grabbed him. Your rear guard is standing with his back to the Florian section. He probably does not know that Florian roots extend throughout the chamber floor. If they wanted to, they could trip him without him ever seeing it coming. Korath's eyes were blazing, but the human was not finished. Most importantly, the guard said, your entire formation assumes that your enemies will attack from the front. You have no rear security, no overhead watch, and no protection against attacks from the sides. He gestured toward his 4 colleagues who still stood in their seemingly random positions around the chamber. My colleagues and I spent the recess counting. We counted your positions, your sight lines, your reaction times. We counted the distance between each warrior and the nearest cover. We counted how long it would take to cross each section of the chamber. We counted the optimal angles for approach and retreat. His voice remained calm and conversational, but something in his tone made the entire chamber hold its breath. We counted, he said simply, how long it would take to neutralize each threat in. The alarm started as a low, pulsing tone that meant general alert. Within seconds, it escalated to the sharp, urgent wail that every council member knew meant immediate threat to life. Security Chief Vextar was on his feet before the second pulse, his 4 eyes scanning every monitor in his control room. The chamber had been tense since the human guard's ominous warning about counting exits, but nothing had prepared him for this. Report! He barked at his assistants. Multiple breach points, Caxtel called out, his young voice cracking with stress. Emergency exits 7 through 12, intruders moving fast through the maintenance corridors. Another assistant added, energy weapon signatures detected, military-grade equipment, at least 15 hostiles, possibly more. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the information. The pure galaxy movement had been making threats for months about cleansing the Council of Inferior Species, but no one had taken them seriously enough to expect a direct assault. Lock down all exits, he ordered. Activate defensive barriers, deploy security teams to... He stopped mid-sentence as his screens showed him something impossible. The intruders were not breaking into the chamber, they were already inside. Figures in black combat suits materialized from hidden access panels that Vextar had not even known existed. They moved with military precision, carrying energy rifles that could punch through ship hulls. Their faces were covered by masks that showed the pure galaxy symbol, a stylized galaxy with most of the stars crossed out. How did they get past our scanners? Vextar demanded. Unknown, Caxtel replied frantically. They must have been planning this for months. They knew our security systems better than we do. On the main floor of the chamber, panic erupted immediately. Delegates scrambled away from their desks as armed figures emerged from concealment all around the circular room. Some species tried to activate personal shields. Others dove for cover behind furniture. The aquatic delegations sealed their mobile tanks, while the Florians extended every defensive thorn they possessed. But the attackers had positioned themselves perfectly. Every delegation found weapons pointed at them from multiple angles. Escape routes were blocked. Emergency exits were covered by hostile fire. Citizens of the galaxy, one of the attackers announced, his voice amplified through stolen council communication systems. You are witnessing the beginning of galactic purification. Too long have inferior species corrupted our shared space with their weakness and primitive thinking. High Commander Korath roared in rage and charged toward the nearest attacker, but 3 energy bolts struck him simultaneously. His personal shields absorbed most of the damage, but the impact sent him crashing into a support pillar. His 12 warriors tried to return fire, but they found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. The attack had been planned with devastating precision. Every species' defensive capabilities had been studied and countered. The Zephyrian plasma rifles were jammed by some kind of electromagnetic field. The Vortani energy shields flickered and failed as the attackers used specific frequencies designed to disrupt their crystal matrix. Even the Florian root network was being blocked by chemical suppressants pumped into the chamber's air system. Vextar watched in horror as his carefully planned security measures crumbled. 17 different species were under direct threat, and his response protocols were useless against enemies who had clearly been planning this assault for months. Then his cameras focused on the human delegation. Ambassador Chen and her diplomatic staff had taken cover behind their overturned desks just like everyone else, but her 5 guards had not moved at all. They stood in their same positions, hands still clasped behind their backs, watching the chaos with the same calm expression they always wore. Energy bolts were flying around them. Other beings were screaming, fighting, or diving for cover. The chamber had erupted into a battlefield, and the human guards looked mildly interested, as if they were watching a moderately entertaining performance. "Target the humans," the lead attacker commanded. "Pure galaxy intelligence indicates they are the newest threat to galactic order. Their expansion must be stopped permanently." 4 attackers turned their weapons toward the human delegation. Ambassador Chen pressed herself lower behind her desk, but her guards made no move to take cover. The first energy bolt was aimed at the tall guard with dark skin who had been speaking to Korath earlier. The bolt should have hit him center mass, but somehow it missed. The guard had moved just slightly to his left, barely a few centimeters, and the deadly energy passed harmlessly by. The second and third bolts were fired simultaneously from different angles. Again, the guards moved with tiny, precise adjustments, not dramatic dodges or desperate dives, but small steps that put them just out of the path of incoming fire. It looked like luck. But Vextar had been watching these humans for weeks, and he knew luck had nothing to do with it. "Impossible," one of the attackers snarled. "No one moves that fast without enhanced reflexes." He aimed more carefully and fired again. This time, the human guard did something that made Vexitar's eyes widen in shock. He caught the energy bolt, not with his hands but with the wooden stick hanging from his belt. In one fluid motion, he drew the simple piece of wood and positioned it so that the energy bolt struck it directly. Instead of burning through the wood, the bolt was somehow deflected harmlessly toward the ceiling. "What kind of wood deflects? Energy weapons?" Caxtel whispered. Vextar did not answer because he was watching something even more impossible unfold on his screens. The 5 human guards were moving, not running, not charging, not doing anything dramatic. They simply walked calmly toward the nearest attackers, their wooden sticks now in their hands. They moved at exactly the same pace they always used, slow, measured, completely unthreatening. But somehow, attackers started falling. The first one went down when a human guard appeared behind him. Vextar reviewed the footage 3 times and still could not figure out how the guard had crossed 15 meters of open ground without being seen. One moment he was standing by Ambassador Chen's desk, the next he was behind an attacker, and the wooden stick was striking pressure points that immediately paralyzed the hostile. The second attacker fell when he tried to track a different guard's movement. He spun in a complete circle, firing wildly, but the human was never where the energy bolts went. By the time the attacker realized he was being led in circles, the wooden stick had already struck his weapon hand, his knee, and the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He dropped like a stone, but it was the third takedown that made Vextar realize just how badly everyone had misjudged the humans. 3 attackers had cornered one of the guards near the Florian section. They formed a triangle around him. Weapons, aimed from 3 different directions. There was no cover, no escape route, no way to dodge simultaneous fire from multiple angles. The guard looked at each of them in turn, still holding his wooden stick casually at his side. "Surrender," one attacker demanded. "You have no weapons and no chance of escape." The human guard nodded politely. "You are correct about the weapons," he said calmly, "but you are wrong about the escape." He moved. Vextar slowed the recording down to quarter speed and still had trouble following what happened. The guard seemed to fold in on himself, dropping low and spinning in a way that put all three attackers in each other's line of fire. As they hesitated to avoid shooting their comrades, he flowed between them like water, the wooden stick moving, in precise arcs that struck specific points on each attacker's body. In less than 3 seconds, all three were unconscious on the floor. But the most terrifying part was not the speed or precision of the takedown. It was the guard's expression throughout the entire encounter. He looked bored. Around the chamber, the pattern repeated. Attackers who had spent months planning the perfect assault found themselves facing opponents who treated their energy weapons like minor inconveniences. The humans moved through the chaos like ghosts, appearing where they were needed, disappearing before counterattacks could be organized. Most disturbing of all, they worked together with a coordination that seemed impossible. Without radio communication, without hand signals, without even looking at each other, the 5 guards moved as if they shared a single mind. When one engaged an attacker, another would be in position to cut off escape routes. When someone tried to flank one guard, another would already be waiting. "How are they communicating?" Vextar demanded. Caxtel was frantically checking sensor readings. "I don't know. There are no radio signals, no encrypted transmissions, nothing." On the chamber floor, the lead attacker was screaming orders at his remaining forces. "Focus fire. All weapons on one target. They cannot dodge everything." 8 energy rifles turned toward a single human guard, the shorter one with dark hair who had suggested the recess earlier. 8 bolts of deadly energy fired simultaneously from different positions. The guard disappeared, not in a dramatic leap or impossible dodge, but simply gone. One moment he was standing in the center aisle, the next he was not there. The energy, bolts struck empty air, and confused attackers spun around trying to find their target. He reappeared behind their line, moving among them like a dancer. His wooden stick struck weapons from hands, feet from under bodies, pressure points that dropped armed opponents instantly. By the time the other attackers the emergency medical teams worked quickly to treat the wounded and remove the unconscious attackers. 17 pure Galaxy extremists had been neutralized, without a single death, something that amazed the medical staff more than anyone else. Energy weapon injuries were usually fatal or permanently disabling, but somehow the human guards had managed to defeat armed opponents using only non-lethal force. Security Chief Vextar stood in the center of the chamber, supervising the cleanup, while trying to process what he had witnessed. His security teams moved around him, documenting evidence and checking for additional threats, but his attention was focused on the 5 humans who had returned to their usual positions, as if nothing had happened. High Commander Korath approached slowly. The massive Keth leader's armor was scorched from energy weapon hits, and he moved with obvious pain from his collision with the support pillar. But his eyes were fixed on the human guards, with an expression Vextar had never seen before on a Keth face. Respect mixed with something that might have been fear. "Ambassador Chen," Korath said formally, "the Keth hegemony owes humanity a debt of honor. Your guard saved many lives today." Ambassador Chen looked up from her discussion with President Thymar. "Thank you, Commander. But my guards were simply doing their job." "Their job," Korath repeated slowly. He looked at the unconscious attackers being carried out on medical stretchers. 17 armed terrorists defeated by 5 beings with wooden sticks. That is not a normal job. One of the human guards, the tall one who had been explaining about counting exits, stepped forward slightly. "Sir, may I correct something you said earlier?" Korath nodded, still staring at the guard as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You said we carry wooden sticks," the guard continued politely. "That is not exactly accurate." He drew his weapon from his belt and held it up for everyone to see. It looked like a simple piece of polished wood, roughly arm length with no obvious modifications or hidden technology. "This is called a tonfa," the guard explained. "It is a traditional human martial arts weapon that has been used for over 1,000 years. But you are right that it is made of wood." Vextar leaned closer, his security scanners still showing no energy signatures or hidden mechanisms in the simple wooden rod. "How?" the security chief asked. Does a piece of wood deflect energy weapons? The guard smiled slightly. It does not, but it does not need to. He demonstrated by moving the tonfa in a complex pattern around his body. His movements were fluid and precise, creating what appeared to be a defensive barrier of spinning wood. Energy weapons fire in straight lines, he explained while continuing the demonstration. They move at known speeds and follow predictable paths. If you know the timing, you can position a solid object to intercept the energy beam at exactly the right angle to deflect it safely. But the calculations required, one of the Vortani delegates chimed with confused harmonics. The precision needed, the split-second timing, no biological mind could process all those variables fast enough. The human guard stopped his demonstration and looked at the crystal being. You are correct, no single mind could do it, he gestured to his 4 colleagues. But we do not use single minds. We use collective processing. Ambassador Chen stepped forward to explain. Our diplomatic security teams trained together for years before assignment. They learn to think and move as a single unit. Each guard processes different aspects of a threat situation and shares information with the others through micro-expressions, body language, and positioning cues too subtle for most species to detect. That is why, another guard added, we do not carry communication devices. We do not need them. We are the communication device. Vextar thought back to all the times he had watched the humans and noticed their perfect coordination. The positioning that looks random, he said slowly. It creates a sensor network. Exactly, the first guard confirmed. 5 beings in optimal positions can monitor every angle, every movement, every potential threat in a space like this. We see everything, and we see it from multiple perspectives simultaneously. President Timar's energy form pulsed with what Vextar recognized as deep thought. This explains your calm during confrontations. You were not threatened because you had already calculated every possible outcome. We calculate constantly, one of the guards agreed. Threat assessment, response options, environmental factors, escape routes, collateral damage potential. By the time violence actually starts, we have already planned our response to every possible scenario. High Commander Korath was shaking his massive head slowly. This is why you told me to count exits. You had already counted everything else. Yes, sir, the guard replied. We knew that if fighting started, the attackers would try to control the exits to prevent escape. We positioned ourselves to counter that strategy before they could implement it. But you did not know about the pure galaxy attack in advance, Vextar protested. That was not planned. Ambassador Chen answered this time. We did not know about the specific attack, but we knew that some form of violence was statistically likely during our early council sessions. New species often face challenges from extremist groups or aggressive existing members. We prepared for multiple scenarios. She looked around the chamber, taking in the damage from the brief battle. Pure Galaxy chose a direct assault with superior numbers and advanced weapons. It was actually one of the easier scenarios to counter. Easier? Korath's voice cracked slightly. They had energy rifles, military training, perfect positioning. They had weapons, one of the guards corrected politely. We had preparation. Weapons can malfunction, run out of power, be taken away. Preparation cannot be removed. Vextar was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. You are not just guards, he said slowly. You are weapons designed to look like guards. The humans exchanged glances and Ambassador Chen nodded to them. Security Chief, she said formally, you have earned the right to understand what you are dealing with. My guards are graduates of the Human Diplomatic Protection Program. It is the most intensive combat training system our species has ever developed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Every guard in this program has studied every known species in the galaxy. They know your strengths, your weaknesses, your fighting styles, your technology, your psychology. They have trained against simulated opponents modeled after each species' capabilities. One of the guards added, we know that Keth warriors rely on strength and direct assault tactics but have poor peripheral vision due to their eye placement. We know that Zephyrian plasma rifles have a 1-second charging delay between shots. We know that Vortani shields can be disrupted by specific sonic frequencies. We know, another guard continued, that Florian root networks communicate through chemical signals that can be predicted and countered. We know that aquatic species have limited mobility outside their tanks. We know the exact specifications of every weapon system in this chamber. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Every delegation was realizing that the humans had been studying them, learning their secrets, preparing to fight them if necessary. This knowledge, President Taimar said finally, could be seen as preparation for conquest. Ambassador Chen shook her head firmly. It is preparation for survival. Humanity has learned from our own history that the best way to avoid violence is to be so thoroughly prepared for it that no one wants to test you. She looked around the chamber at each delegation in turn. We carry no weapons because we do not need weapons. We have something better, perfect knowledge of our opponents combined with perfect coordination among ourselves. But why reveal this now? Vextar asked. You could have maintained the illusion of harmlessness. Because, Ambassador Chen replied, the illusion was never the goal. Understanding was the goal. She gestured to the unconscious attackers being carried out. Today, you saw what happens when someone mistakes human diplomatic guards for easy targets. But more importantly, you saw that we used only the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. We could have killed every attacker within the first 30 seconds. Instead, we chose to disable them non-lethally. One of her guards added, the most dangerous weapon is the one that chooses not to fire. High Commander Korath stood silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, he spoke in a voice much quieter than his usual roar. The territorial dispute over the outer spiral colonies, he said. The Keth hegemony withdraws our claims. The colonies are yours by right of settlement. Ambassador Chen looked surprised. Commander, that is not necessary. We can still discuss documentation of sacred sites and reach a compromise. No, Korath said firmly. A species that can defeat 17 armed attackers with wooden sticks has earned those colonies through strength. It is the Keth way. Other delegations began murmuring among themselves. The implications were enormous. Humanity had just demonstrated military capabilities that changed every calculation about galactic power balance. President Taimar's energy form pulsed with authority. This session is adjourned while the Council considers the implications of today's events. All delegations are requested to file updated threat assessments within one standard.